Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Big Brother 26 towards the end of week 10. And I feel like this is finally the point in the season where things are starting to slow down, where things become a bit more standard and boring, but also kind of clear cut in terms of the actual ranking here. Now, I am recording this on Tuesday, September 24th, and if you're new to the channel or only follow these shows through the episodes, I'll be heavily discussing the live feeds and spoiling the viewer results. So if you don't want to be spoiled, now's your chance to click out the video. But we have 8 people to talk about, and it's wasting more time. Let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 8, we have the latest boot from the season, and here we have T-Core. And T-Core is someone who technically wasn't the target at the time she was put up after the veto ceremony, even though a lot of that was because Leah herself didn't think that the numbers were there to take her out. Even though the numbers did prove to be there, where the likes of MJ and Can proved to be pretty resolute and wanted to take out T-Core by the end of the week to weaken that trio, and that's what ends up happening here. Now, I do have to fault T-Core a decent amount for, one, not campaigning to keep herself off the block to begin with, but even beyond that, not really doing that much to allow herself to stay here, where it very much felt like at the point where MJ was putting her foot down to try to take her out of the game, and with Chelsea being fine to acquiesce here, it didn't seem like T-Core had much of a shot to stay, and sure enough, she was taken out pretty handily. And if we're talking about T-Core more generally, she was technically one of the bigger players on the season in the sense that she technically was the one to take out Tucker during her HOH reign, and she was in a pretty decent spot for a lot of the game. However, I do think at the end of the day, she was a pretty passive player, where even though she was technically effective in getting certain things done, I feel like those were things that kind of fell into her lap. And even beyond that, I felt like she could have done more to do even more, but was simply too passive to really allow herself to put herself in these good positions. And she just kind of got lucky at certain points. And I do think she was a pretty big threat by the end of her run, where had she gotten to the end, she would have had pretty clear people supporting her on the jury with the likes of Kemo and Reyna there, who seemed pretty fine to just lay down their games to allow T-Core to win. And while she herself got pretty obnoxious by the end of it with her claiming that she was one of the good people and that the good people should win, I still feel like T-Core will probably be one of the better players on the season, but she is now out of the game, which is why she's here at number 8. And with that, we have 7 people left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely they think they are to win the game based off their current game position. And obviously we are going into a double eviction on Thursday night, so I do have to kind of factor in how I think that may go, which obviously affects certain placements here, but it is kind of crazy that by the end of Thursday night, we'll be down to just 5 people left, and that the season is pretty much almost over by this point. But at number 7, the person I believe is the least likely to win from this point on, easy person I believe is the most likely to go out in the first half of the double, and here we have Leah. And I already said before that Leah made a pretty big mistake during her HOH by not putting up Chelsea alongside T-Core, and while she had the opportunity to rectify the mistake due to her and Angela win the vetoes, she herself only did a half measure by putting up T-Core while not using her own veto to ensure Chelsea goes up. And I think this week further exemplified why that was a mistake, where instead of Leah and Angela being in the middle of these two trios fighting for power and fighting for their influence, they're just at the bottom, and they're just put up together on the block here by MJ of all people, who was one of their better case scenarios for this HOH here, considering that MJ had a relationship with Angela and Leah. But instead, they're just on the bottom, and they're just put up together here. And obviously, Leah's the main target at this point, even though MJ herself didn't really want to target Leah to where she felt like she was manipulated by Chelsea into putting up Leah because that's what the house wants. But here we are, Leah's on the block, and she doesn't really have much of a chance of staying here. While MJ herself doesn't want Leah to go, I feel like the votes simply won't be there to take her out, where obviously Cam and Chelsea are pretty locked in voting her out, while Kemo and Reyna are a bit more up for grabs, but even then, Leah's throwing them under the bus by blaming Kemo for convincing the house that Leo is making all these deals and that Leo's his big threat. And I feel like with Leah there on the block next to Angela of all people, I feel like the shot will be taken to take Leah out. And it's kind of a shame considering that she literally had the opportunity this past week to put herself into a better position, a position that she herself talked about by putting up Chelsea and T-Core. But instead she didn't do that, and now she's paying the price where she's probably going to go home on Thursday night, which is kind of a shame, but that's where we are at this point, which is why she's here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and this is someone who I've gone down on quite a bit considering the way that they played this week. And I feel like even going to the double, they're in quite a bit of danger, but we do have MJ, the current HOH. And very similar to what I said about Leah from last week, I am very disappointed in MJ here, where she came into this week seemingly in a position to put herself in the center of the game, where she had just put her foot down and wanted to take T-Core out, someone that Chelsea was very much vying to keep, and really showing herself to be someone that was willing to go against Chelsea to improve her own game. And I feel like had MJ played this week optimally, she would have essentially put herself in the middle of all these duos where she would have had decent relationships with Leah and Angela, with Cam and Chelsea, and even with Kemo and Reyna. All at the same time, all these duos would have been preoccupied in targeting each other, considering that Kemo and Reyna would have been preoccupied in targeting Leah and Angela for taking out T-Core, and Cam and Chelsea would have been focused on them. And I feel like that would have put MJ in a pretty masterful spot moving forward, except MJ plays this HOH about as terribly as she could have, to where it almost feels like MJ's actively trying to lose this game by whatever means she can, where almost immediately after winning this HOH, she caves in to Chelsea and does pretty much everything that she wants her to do, where first up she puts up Angela and Reyna in a spot to where she's targeting Angela, which feels completely unnecessary there, considering she had actively saved Angela just a couple weeks ago and just burning that relationship for no reason. And despite her not even wanting to put up Leah due to wanting to keep Leah's jury vote, she's later manipulated by Chelsea into doing so after MJ had won the veto herself, and also in a spot to where she's blindsiding Leah, not even telling her that she's going up, just completely burning Leah as well for no reason, and pretty much putting up the two people that would have kept her safe moving forward. And considering that she won both the HOH and the veto this week, she's not even gaining any favor with the rest of the house, as she's being widely talked about as someone to be targeted during the double, to where unless she wins the veto, I feel like MJ is in a lot of danger to go out right after Leah. And even if she stays, even if she survives a double eviction, I feel like the way that she's played this HOH will severely harm her jury chances moving forward, as the fact that she took out Leah on her own HOH in a spot to where people knew that she was working with Leah just makes MJ come off as a massive puppet for Chelsea, someone not even playing her own game. And I feel like MJ herself is someone who is pretty resigned to allowing Chelsea to win at this point. Now, granted, in the last day or so, I think MJ has started to realize that she has made a massive mistake, and through that there could be a world where she could change that in the future. But I feel like she's already done a decent amount of damage by allowing Leah to go up and potentially go home under her own HOH. And I feel like the fact that she has played her HOH so actively bad when she had so much upside coming into it, mixing in the fact that she's not even safe for the double, where she is being talked about as a massive comp threat, are all big reasons why she is so low in this power ranking, despite the fact that she is technically safe for the first half of the double, and it's a big reason why she's here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and we have the other person currently on the block, but we do have Angela. And Angela is someone who was the target for a lot of the week, where it seemed like had the noms stayed the same that Angela would have been going out. And for a lot of the week, it seemed like MJ was going to keep the noms the same to allow Angela to go out. But once again, Angela is saved by things that she didn't necessarily do, where it very much felt like Chelsea was the one to push MJ over the edge and using the veto to put up Leah. And Leah is the target over Angela, to where Angela is the pawn. So I guess that's something. The fact that Angela is at least being safe here for at least for the first half of the double. But again, I feel like she's also not entirely safe coming to this double, where if MJ wins the veto, I feel like Angela could be a very easy person to target there and potentially take out, mixing in the fact that I think she also doesn't have that much win equity, where while I think there was a case last week that she could have had this upward trajectory, I feel like the fact that she's now back at the bottom and doesn't really have that much time left to change people's perceptions will make it pretty hard for Angela to actually win a jury vote by the end of it, where I feel like her best case scenario is probably against Kemo, though even then I feel like Kemo would win that. I feel like Angela is someone who will really struggle to win a jury vote, but on the other hand, she's at least safe for this first half, and I feel like she didn't play this week as terribly as someone like an MJ, which is why she's here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and we have another person who I feel like is kind of drawing dead from a jury perspective, but I guess they could win depending on the final 2 scenario, but we do have Kemo. And Kemo is someone who is just kind of not trying at this point, where he seems pretty resigned to Chelsea just getting her way to final 3 in a spot to where he loses to her. Not to mention the fact that despite him being a very passive player, he's still getting a decent amount of flack for things, where you have him being put up as the pawn once again this week. And while he does later have the veto used on him, you have now the fact that Leah's blaming him for spreading like the bad stuff about Leah that has caused her to be put up on the block. And I feel like the fact that Kemo of all people is being blamed for this is pretty bad in my eyes. And while I think Rabina is more likely to go home over him, I feel like Kemo himself is someone that isn't really trying anymore. Or even this week where you had MJ talking about using the veto on him, Kemo expressed doubt about it and was questioning MJ over whether it was actually a good move for MJ to use the veto on him, which further speaks to the fact that he just doesn't seem to care at this point. Or even where MJ is talking about doing something that directly benefits him, he still doesn't just take it, which I found pretty funny there. But I feel like Kemo is someone who I'm not feeling that great about at this point, which is why he's here number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and we have someone who I just mentioned, but we do have Reyna. And I feel like Reyna is trying a bit more than Kemo, though I don't think that's entirely saying much. Where I think the major thing to give Reyna over Kemo is you do have to give her a little bit of credit for pushing MJ to use the veto to backdoor Leah, where she did have some conversations with MJ in the day leading up to the veto decision. And I do think Reyna deserves some credit for that. Now, I would give more credit to Cam and Chelsea for this, but I feel like Reyna still contributed somewhat to this, so I'll give her that. But admittedly, I think she's also in a bit more danger coming into the double compared to Kemo, where I feel like Kemo is someone who's pretty lock safe, despite the fact that he's getting blamed by the likes of Leah, considering the fact that Leah is now coming out the door. But I feel like Reyna is someone who could also be targeted as a way of further weakening Kemo in the game. But I also think Reyna has more win equity compared to Kemo, where I feel like in a Kemo Reyna Final 2, Reyna probably wins that, where I feel like Reyna seems to be the more active player, though I don't think that's really saying much. But I still feel like she has the fundamental flaw of just giving Chelsea too much power, just allowing Chelsea to walk all over the game at this point, which is a pretty big knock there, which is why she's here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and I feel like there's a pretty big gap between number 2 and the rest of the field, but also a pretty big gap between number 2 and number 1. But number 2, we do have Cam. And I think the thing really propping up Cam here is I feel like he has the clearest path to a win outside the number 1 person, where I feel like there's a very good chance that we get to Final 3, he wins Final HOH and is able to cut Chelsea, and through that get to the end and potentially win. Now, again, I think he could struggle against certain people like Reyna, for instance, but I feel like Cam is probably the second biggest trade threat at this point, especially considering MJ is now really souring her own win equity through the Leah move. I feel like Cam is probably the second most likely person to win a jury vote at this point. And I feel like he's still pretty likely to get to Final 3, despite all the drama that he's had with Chelsea, and Chelsea just being annoyed with Cam over all the MJ stuff here. But again, I feel like the fact that Cam is the second most likely person to win has a path to potentially win if he's able to actually cut Chelsea at Final 3. And even beyond that, I feel like you do have to give him some credit as well for convincing MJ to use the veto here to backdoor Leah. I think Cam definitely deserves some credit for that as well. But I still feel like it's a decent gap between him and the number 1 person, which is why he's here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Big Brother 26 at this point is still Chelsea. And I feel like the gap just widened this week between Chelsea and the rest of the pack here, where while it did seem that she was losing some favor here, where she doesn't get her way in losing T-Core, where she obviously votes out T-Corp, that was in a spot to where she knew it was going to happen anyway. It seemed for a brief moment that MJ could have surpassed Chelsea in the game in terms of their position, only for MJ to immediately forfeit all of that and to just concede to whatever Chelsea wants, where Chelsea essentially gets what she wants this week, where she wants to target Leah. That happens. MJ does backdoor Leah, and you do have to give Chelsea a decent amount of credit for manipulating MJ to backdoor Leah in a spot where MJ didn't want to do so necessarily. I think Chelsea deserves a decent amount of credit for this move. And considering the rest of the field, considering the fact that you have the likes of Cam, MJ, Kemo, Reyna, all being people that are not really willing to target Chelsea, at least anytime before Final 3, I think Chelsea is in a very dangerous spot to potentially win the game here. Now, I can't say yet that she's guaranteed to win, where I still think there are paths for Chelsea to get cut along the way, particularly at Final 3. Where for one, you do have MJ starting to realize that she got duped by Chelsea into putting up Leah here. And if MJ is able to survive the double and if she's able to grow a backbone, I think there's a world where MJ could just win out and potentially cut Chelsea before the end. That's at least somewhat of a possibility, though I wouldn't bank on it. And then you also have Cam, who could also cut Chelsea if he wins Final 3 HOH, but doesn't seem very likely to target Chelsea beforehand. And on top of that, I feel like before Final 3, there's no way to really get Chelsea out at this point, where I feel like against anyone else, Chelsea stays if she's on the block against them, which I think also speaks to how much of a frontrunner she is. So I feel like Chelsea's in a very dangerous spot to win the game at this point, where I feel like she's the most competent player to 3, where even though I feel like she has plenty of faults, particularly with the fact that she still gets into fights with Cam over the MJ situation, mixing in the fact that these players don't seem to be very self-interested and are just pretty fine to let Chelsea get towards the Final 3 here, and in a spot to where she herself could still theoretically win some comps herself to ensure that she gets to the end regardless. I feel like Chelsea has by far the most amount of pros going for her, where while I don't think it's completely locked up yet, I feel like there's a very strong chance that we are looking at Chelsea as the next winner of Big Brother, or if not, at least someone that gets the Final 3. But I feel like with everything going in our favor, I do have Chelsea here at number 1. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. Really helps with the channel. Now I'll be back again next week after the double eviction, where we'll be breaking down the results of that. And I'll also be getting to my jury scenarios video because it's that time of the season again. So stay tuned for that. I'm covering other shows at this point, including Survivor 47, and about to begin coverage of Hell's Kitchen, so look forward to that. I'm on Patreon and have a YouTube membership, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description, and you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.